Council, you are live.
We don't have a quorum. We can't start yet. For those in the room. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's work session. It is Monday, June 23rd, 2025 at 1:08 p.m. Just kidding, just teasing. Thanks, everyone, for your patience while we established quorum this afternoon. Fortunately, we have a couple of colleagues who are in Germany, and so, we're a little short today, but we're here. And we're going to get started with the Pledge of Allegiance. If you can all join me, please. Thank you so much. Again, thank you for your patience. And first up, we'll have Jobs of the Week with Sarah Rainey.
Good afternoon. Alrighty, my name is Sarah Rainey. I'm the one-stop coordinator for the Southwest region of America's Job Center, New Mexico. For Jobs of the Week, this week we have a water resources service technician for the city for $21.10 an hour. At this time, it's a continuous posting. We also have a heavy equipment operator 2 for the city. That one starts at $21.10 as well, and it is a continuous posting too. We have a branch manager for Lynn Gas and Equipment. That one closes on July 10th. A student program coordinator senior at NMSU starting at $17.85. That posting closes very soon on July 2nd. And we also have a content director at KRWG on the NMSU campus starting at $59,000, and that position will be opened until filled. At the Doniana Park Apartments, we have a maintenance tech. Also wanted to just remind you guys, we have the Community of Hope job readiness event coming up this week on Wednesday. That's where anybody that's out there can come for resume help, interview help, any sort of career pathways. Anybody is welcome. Also, employers are welcome to come join us. If you're looking for employees, there's always people looking out there. So we definitely welcome everyone on all sides. Also, we have the Lions Club free glasses event at our office on 226 South Alameda Boulevard. So that one's going to be on Thursday from 9 to 3. And as always, you can stay connected with us. You can scan the QR code or follow us on any of the social media aspects. Employee NM is always our call, so you can reach us and find all of our events across the region, especially here in Los Cruces, on there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
There you go.
Next up, we have Pets of the Week with Carol Nielsen.
I'm Carol Nilsson, Digital Content Specialist, and apparently I'm living a week behind. I forgot to update the date on the presentation. So just as a reminder, our Dog and Cat of the Week are available at no cost the week that they are promoted, so great time to come out and visit them. This week, our Dog of the Week is Teddy. He is still available to adopt. He says, I'm a gentle and sweet pup who may be a bit shy at first, but once you get to know me, you'll see my playful side. I love engaging in push-pull play with my furry friends and enjoy my time in play groups where I'm learning to be more social. I walk well on a leash and love to explore, sniffing everything along the way. With a little patience and love, I'm sure I'll blossom even more. If you're looking for a furry friend who appreciates gentle affection and outdoor adventures, I might just be the perfect match for you. And our Cat of the Week is also available to adopt still. Dragonfly says, when I first arrived, I was a bit shy also, just like our Dog of the Week, but I started to warm up to staff fairly quickly. While I may not be the most social cat, I don't mind when you come close. I prefer to hang out in my cubby where I feel safe and secure, but don't get me wrong, I don't mind when you give me attention. Once I start to get comfortable and you start petting me, I lean in and soak up all the love. If you don't mind a companion who just needs a little patience, I'd love to meet you. We'd also like to highlight some of our long-term residents. Our longest-term resident right now is Whisper, who has been at the shelter for 327 days. Peppa has been with us 323 days. Talia has been at the shelter 269 days, and Macchiato 235 days. And so, as always, our residents who have been with us 3 months or more are available for just $25, so they're also great options for adoptions. And this weekend, we will be at the farmers market here downtown. We did decide, this says 10 to 1, but I do want to clarify, we decided for the health of our pets, we're going to actually change it to 9 to 12 just to get them out of the heat a little quicker. So, and that's everything for this week. If you would like more information, feel free to follow us on social media or visit our website, ascmv.org, for more information.
Thanks so much, Carol.
Thank you.
On to our agenda items, we have 3.1, a review of the strategies, goals, settings, and populations recommended by the Opioid Settlement Advisory Council in order to develop allowable expenditure recommendations for opioid settlement funds. Presenting will be Barbara Bencomo.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem, Council, and staff. Barbara Bencomo for the record. Let me get this started. Right. All right, and as you stated, today we're here to talk about the opioid settlement and the work that's been done by the Opioid Settlement Advisory Council in making recommendations to you for the allowable expenditures. And so before I get into the presentation, I do want to recognize those advisory council members and support staff that we have here, folks who have been working hard on these recommendations. And so as I call their name, I'm just going to ask them to stand where they are in the audience. So we have Gabriela Vasquez, representing Public Health through the New Mexico Department of Health. We have, thank you. We have Tanika Gonzalez, representing treatment providers in the LC3 Behavioral Health Collaborative. Miguel Ramirez, representing community health workers. Thank you. We have Shara Thorpe and Gina Posada from Doña Ana County Health and Human Services. And we have our own Wes Smith from Las Cruces Fire Department, MIH, and Light Program. Thanks to everyone who's done such tremendous work and has taken so much time to make sure that they are recommending meaningful expenditures to you, as we're going to be bringing those forward in the future. So today we'll talk briefly about the settlement agreements, the selected core strategies that we got from the March 10th joint work session, and then we'll talk about the goals, settings, and populations that the Advisory Council is recommending today that will form the basis of the expenditures and activities that we'll be bringing forward to you as part of the next steps for the opioid settlement. As we've mentioned previously, the settlements to date have been with distributors, manufacturers, and retailers. The city is expected to receive almost $10 million through 2038, and to date we have received just over $3.6 million. The use of the funds is to address the harms of the opioid crisis, and the allowable uses are governed by the settlement agreement, what we know as Exhibit E. The funds are held separately as stipulated in the settlement, and then for purposes of transparency, the city website does have all the information about the opioid settlement and the funds received. Some key public meetings that we've had leading up to today. In September of 2023, we got our first public overview of the settlement funds from outside counsel, and the Opioid Settlement Advisory Council was established. In May of 2024, we had a joint city-county work session to review the preliminary community needs assessment that was done by NMSU Crimson Research and to get guidance on some additional data collection that was recommended. In August of 24, the Advisory Council hosted a stakeholder workshop with key informants that included first responders and those in the school system to work on reviewing the needs assessment and developing recommendations. In March of 2025, we had, again, a joint city-county work session, and that's where we selected the recommended strategies for the use of funds. And again, today we're here to further drill down on the framework for developing the recommended expenditures by looking at the recommended goals, settings, and populations to focus on. As always, the guiding principles for the use of funds include spending money to save lives, using evidence to guide spending, investing in youth prevention, focusing on racial equity, and developing a fair and transparent process. The Advisory Council, as they have been mulling all the allowable uses and then looking at information to make determinations about what will be most impactful to our community, have been relying on the following: the NMSU Crimson Research Needs Assessment that I spoke about earlier, the stakeholder workshop that brought more input forward, their own knowledge and expertise on evidence-based practices, and then, of course, the Exhibit E allowable expenditures from the settlements. So those are some of the many pieces of information that were considered in order to bring forward recommendations to you. So the framework for the allowable uses starts with core strategies. We'll talk about these a little bit more in just a second, but that was the focus of the March joint work session. As I mentioned, there are many allowable uses because these are nationwide settlements, but we want to tailor the recommendations to what our community needs. And that's why we did the NMSU Crimson Research Needs Assessment, so that we could determine, of all of the allowable strategies, what are the ones that would be most impactful to our community, and I'll go over those in just a sec. Once we adopt the strategies, then the next part of the framework is, what are the goals? What is it we're hoping to accomplish? And where are we going to be doing that, in what settings? And who will be receiving services, the populations that we'll focus on. So today we're going to really be looking at those goals, settings, and populations in a little bit more detail. And then, of course, all of that framework is leading to the recommended activities and expenditures that we'll be looking forward to as part of the next step of this process. So in March, at the joint city and county work session, of the 9 allowable core strategies in the settlement agreement, there were actually 4 that were selected. 1, medication-assisted treatment. 2, warm handoff and recovery services. 3, prevention programs. And the 4th one, which I'm kind of holding separately, was data collection and reporting. And not that that is not important, because it really is. We need that in order to make sure that the expenditures are yielding the desired results. We need to collect data and analyze that. But it won't be under much discussion today because it's universal. It doesn't have specific settings or populations associated with it. We're going to be collecting data on every expenditure that we make and tracking the outcomes and the goals that we're setting for those expenditures. So going back to the framework for the allowable expenditures, after the strategies are selected, the next part of the framework, as I mentioned, are the goals. What is it we are hoping to achieve? And the Advisory Council has helped us to narrow down to 8 goals to focus on. The first one, to improve access to and utilization of medication for opioid use disorder, to increase access to MOUD in rural areas and for Spanish-speaking constituents, to improve early identification of opioid use disorders by implementing universal screening, to improve access to naloxone or Narcan for people most vulnerable to overdose, to incorporate harm reduction services into medical and emergency care to people at risk of overdose or from developing opioid use disorder, to improve the capacity within the healthcare system to identify and treat opioid use disorder, to create a more comprehensive continuum of care for substance use disorder or opioid use disorder, and to improve transitions of care. And by transitions of care, we're talking about things like discharge from the emergency department or release from the criminal justice system, or it could be just going through a primary medical care visit. There's a number of transitions that could be addressed. And then finally, to prevent the development of opioid use disorder, primarily in children and youth, by addressing risk factors. So these are the 8 recommended goals to focus on. And then again, thinking about the framework for the allowable uses, we start with strategies, we go to goals, what are we going to accomplish, and then we look at settings. Where are we going to apply our efforts? And there are 10 allowable settings, and the Advisory Council is recommending we focus on 5 of those. And I'll go through each one of those settings with associated populations. Emergency department is one of the settings for people who overdose or who may present with withdrawal symptoms. In our community, people who are justice involved or likely to be and have either opioid use disorder or substance use disorder. Older people, people at risk of developing opioid use disorder or overdosing, especially children and youth, so those vulnerable. Another setting, residential treatment facilities, primary care clinics, and intensive inpatient programs for people who have current substance use disorder and or serious mental illness, and all new patients, primarily for screening. The realm of our first responders, people who overdose or near overdose but may not go to emergency departments, people in rural communities and or who are Spanish speaking. The primary care setting, obstetrics, pediatric clinics, labor and delivery for pregnant, postpartum women, infants, and their families, and children and youth at risk for developing opioid use disorder. And finally, in the child welfare realm, for children and youth involved with justice or care systems, or children and youth at risk for developing opioid use disorder. So those are the recommended settings and populations that would inform the recommendations that would be coming forward for specific activities and dollar amounts. But before I move forward, I do want to speak about one more setting, because in reviewing this with our police chief and fire chief, they also made the recommendation that one setting that we address is in schools, primarily for prevention, children and youth at risk for developing opioid use disorder. So I don't want to give the impression that the Advisory Council did not want to address youth prevention programs, but the focus of the Advisory Council was more on in the community setting and in other settings, not primarily in schools. But I'm including this because, as I mentioned, it's input from our police and fire chief about where we should be spending money. So with that, we're here today to get guidance on those goals, settings, and populations that we've narrowed down, again, based on our community needs assessment, based on the input from our workshops, based on the data that we've reviewed. And then once that is done, we're going to be able to select the activities, programs, and outcome measures for the initial funding recommendations. Initially, we are thinking about a 2-year funding cycle. And again, we would be tracking the outcomes from those initial expenditures. We would develop the logic models and the scope of work, including an evaluation framework for allocating funds. And we determine the funding process for distribution, monitoring, and reporting. And as well, we need to talk about the establishment of a trust, which we talked a little bit about last go-round at the joint city-county work session. Some of the funds might be allocated directly. For example, if we wanted to fund the acquisition of Narcan for our police and fire, we could directly allocate that to our public safety entities. But some of the funding would need to go through an RFP process because there may be community providers who would apply to assist us by providing the services and the scope of work that we would detail through that process. So again, once we get the guidance on the goals, settings, and populations, we already have strategies, we'd be able to do all of that work and come back to you. We'd like to come back in the August timeframe for a fall potential RFP. And of course, as I mentioned before, we would continue to monitor and report back to the council and commission and the community. And of course, we're subject to annual audits from our state as well. So a lot of work has been done, a lot of work still has to be done. And with that, we will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Barbara, and thanks to the folks here who've been with us for a couple of years now, I think, and for those who couldn't come as well, please extend our gratitude, Barbara. I'll go to questions. Councilor Flores.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, and thank you to the other Ms. Bencomo. No relation. I too am concerned. Perdón? ¿Qué? You couldn't hear me? You're kidding. So I too was concerned to see, as a police department and the fire department, to not see an active participation in schools. Councilor Graham and I serve on the community schools board, and community, to me, I mean, I know that I don't know if you have a caveat or something that would, whatever it's called, prohibition or whatever, to not work with the schools. But I know that when my boys were in elementary school, there was a program that the police department put on, but I can't remember, it's been like 50 years ago, I can't remember what it was called, but they would come home with things, and then they would, at dinner time, we would talk about it, or they'd, talk to their friends about it, and it was about staying away from drugs and alcohol. And I was just, and it was something that became the parents would talk about it at the PTA meetings and all that. But so, is there any way for this group to work with our community, especially our community schools, who really reach out to to all corners of our county here?
Yes. Yes. So Mayor Pro Tem and Councilor Flores, thank you for the input. And no, there's no prohibition on working with the schools on this sort of thing. One of the things that the Advisory Council took into consideration is whether there were other funding sources already funding some of those programs in different settings. And that was, I believe, one of the considerations. The other one is, for example, potentially in the community setting, the prevention programs could incorporate not just the students or the youth, children and youth, but their families as well. So they're just different settings allow for different types of programming, similarly in the child welfare setting, for example. So there are a number of ways to address prevention programs. There's nothing that stipulates that we could not work with the schools, and that's why it's an allowable setting, and I included it as a recommendation.
So, yeah, and thank you for that.
From our chiefs. Sorry.
But how is it going to be implemented, Ms. Bencomo? Are you going to reach out to the community school system or to the district office of LCPS?
So Mayor Pro Tem and Councilor Flores, once we get guidance on what direction to go in for the funding, yes, there's going to be a lot more work to undertake. I know that when I spoke with the the chiefs, they had some ideas of some programs that they were aware of. I know the schools have as well. And so we would need to have some conversations about where identifying programs and or needs. And I don't know if the chiefs would like to jump in as well on this, since it was part of our discussion on this specific topic.
Thank you, Barbara. Mayor Pro Tem, Councilor Flores. The program you're referring to with your sons was DARE, the original DARE program, and so several studies kind of invalidated it, and then you saw it went away. So we were very active with DARE. It's hard to justify it when all the research is saying it doesn't work. Now there's several programs, including a new DARE model that has evidence behind it and operation prevention from DEA. And so we would like to look at or consider getting back into our schools with these newer models that have more evidence behind them to start youth prevention again. I think regardless of the funding source, whether it's through these funds or a different pot of money, starting with our community schools is a good place to start, so we can do a pilot or a trial with those schools. But that's something we want to pursue regardless and find a way to make it happen.
Thank you so much for that, Chief Story. And thank you, Ms. Bencomo. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilor Matisse.
Yeah, I was just going to add for Mr. Story, Chief Story, there's a lady, Leticia Sanchez, and she's actually working with the Las Cruces Public Schools. I believe there may be a couple of pilot programs on the new DARE program, and she wanted to expand that, so anything we can do to get a hold of Leticia and then maybe expand that, I think it would be good for all the schools to have that new program. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I think I would like to remind us that we have no authority over the schools and what they decide to do with curriculum or not. But I do think it's important that we're in collaboration. In terms of the schools, and perhaps, Barbara, if you can put the squares, I forgot to note which, that one. Right, so there's obviously some that we're not covering. I am curious if the council has discussed the ways in which the state allocation will be supplementing some of this, right? Like the state also has a significant settlement portion. Do you know yet, Barbara, how? Yes, will you share with us a little bit of how they're going to be spending that?
Yes, and thank you for that question, Mayor Pro Tem. We actually now have information not only from the state, because they've been allocating funds for a couple of years now, but also the city of Albuquerque and Bernalillo County just finished an almost 2-year process where they were evaluating what to spend the funds on, and they allocated funds as well. So I do have information on both. With respect to the state, they've been allocating funds since 2023, and of course the state is going to receive a lot more than we will receive. The state is slated or expected to receive $391 million in that neighborhood. The state has set up 2 funds, the opioid settlement restricted funds where their receipts come in, and the opioid crisis recovery fund where they spend funds, and they are only allocating or planning to allocate 5% of their receipts. So they're effectively setting up a trust for this. So they've already done that. And then the funds are expended through legislative appropriation. So that's what we've seen it in House Bill 2 for the last 3 years. Some of their allocations have been for medication-assisted treatment. In fact, both Albuquerque and the state are allocating the majority of their funds to the treatment realm. And then Albuquerque very specifically is allocating 60% for treatment, 40% for prevention. And if you look at all the things that the state is doing, they're not far off from that mark as well. The state is doing a lot of capacity building, even facilities, looking to bring in providers. They're trying to expand mental health services, looking at supportive housing, giving allocations for childcare, for example, as part of supportive services, in addition to some of the programming that we're talking about in terms of prevention program and that sort of thing. In Albuquerque and Bernalillo County, they are funding a prevention program through the school district there, and it is called Crossroads Prevention Program. It's primarily a counseling program, so I don't have all of the details about it, but I do know that both Albuquerque and Bernalillo County are funding that through their school district as part of their 40% allocation for prevention funds. And then the rest, treatment options. So I don't know if that helps. Does that?
Yeah, thanks,
Was that what you
Barbara.
were
So
looking
just
for?
to be clear, the
Yeah.
state, through their allocation, has been funding prevention measures.
Treatment and prevention, correct.
Okay, good.
So that's the area of focus, and it aligns with the strategies that we've set. But for our community, we
Yeah.
may do it in different settings than what the state is doing it.
I hope
And-
so.
yes,
Yeah, I
and
think,
I don't know if sorry, I'm looking back because I don't want to ignore if any of the advisory council members want to jump in. I don't want to speak for all if they'd like to add anything. Sorry.
yeah, absolutely. If the community members, if you want to speak up, I'll allow some time at the end as well. But if you want to come in now, just raise your hand. And you just said that, right, Barbara, around, I think we want to make magic with this money. And I think we will, and I think the folks in our community will. I also just want us to have a balance in terms of, like, there are families being torn apart because of the opioid crisis right now, right? Like, people are dying right now, and I think it's a very fine balance in terms of treatment now and prevention. Obviously, I'm a social worker. I want to go upstream, and I think we just have to have a very good, clear analysis of what the state is doing and how they're spending down this money as well, so that we're not necessarily replicating efforts and not making the money go as far as it needs to. I just have a couple of more questions. Councilor Graham, do you have anything before I jump in? Okay.
I have another question too.
Okay, I'll come back to you, Councilor Flores. On the settings and populations, most of them are pretty specific. I'm curious if any of you can talk more about the community setting. I think that feels a little bit more nebulous, if you will, right? The other ones feel very specific. I'm curious, Barbara, what the community conversation, how that went.
Yeah, and I think what you see with there are 3 bullets of populations under that community setting. The second 2, as I mentioned, those are your vulnerable populations. So the focus is on older people and children and youth, for sure. And then, of course, we want to look at people who are justice involved. We talked about transitions. We don't want people to fall through the cracks, and we want to make sure that we are improving that continuum of care so we can address underlying causes for those folks who already might be in the justice system. So with all of these, I will say, there's a lot of allowable strategies. There's a lot of allowable settings. We don't have unlimited funds.
Yeah.
So we are trying to focus our efforts where they will be most impactful in this first round of spending, which, I mentioned we're thinking about this 2-year cycle. So that's not to say that we're not going to come back and maybe pivot to a different setting or population. It depends on, what is the data showing us once we get this out there? What is our community experiencing? What are our first responders telling us? What are our school professionals telling us? So we want to be able to respond to that, and I think that was some of the input you gave us previously about wanting to make sure that we have a source of funds as we progress through the years to address this crisis as it unfolds and perhaps takes a different shape. So I will say that the focus of the discussion on the strategies, goals, settings, and populations is looking at the priorities now. Not to say that there aren't other important things, but with $10 million sounds like a lot. We've only received $3.6 million. It's not that much. So we don't necessarily want to recommend putting a little bit of money on a lot of different things that might not have the impact that we'd like to see for our community. So that's a very general answer, but I'll say that's a guiding principle in order to make these hard recommendations for what to prioritize.
No, I really agree with that guiding principle, Barbara. Thank you. I don't necessarily have any guidance in terms of the strategies, the goals, settings, and populations. I think where I want to sort of give some thoughts is this next step for the funding cycle and how the advisory committee sets up that process for distribution, implementation, evaluation, and making sure that this continues to be a guiding principle around, I don't know if you'll set some sort of rubric or whatever that does give weight to those kind of programs that are going to make the most impact right now. I'm ready for that conversation, and I hope it comes soon. I think the community, I've had treatment and like providers reach out and say, hey, is this available yet? And so I think our community knows about it. I think they're ready about it, and I think we're going to see some really exciting kinds of proposals. And so I'm ready for that conversation, and I do hope that it comes, soon, early August.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Yes, and I will say, just want to clarify, and you'll see on these on this timeline that we've got activities, dates, and those who will be involved in doing the work. We're going to shift a little bit from we've relied on certainly our advisory council to a large extent to sift through all this information, make the recommendations, our elected officials to provide guidance. Now there is going to be a lot of staff involvement for us to come back to to you with the specific breakdown of activities, funding. As I said, some of the funding might be internal allocations, some of it might be RFPs. I know that the city and the county, we would like to coordinate as much as possible on any RFPs that we have so that we could coordinate, for example, pre-proposal conferences between the city and the county, because we'll get some of the same questions from the community members perhaps about some of the RFPs that will be going out there. And so we really want to make this as cohesive as possible so we can minimize any confusion in the community about how the providers can respond to these RFPs. So there will be a lot of staff work, and you'll see that here in developing some of the evaluation frameworks, and then the determination for the allocation of funds. But again, that's going to come back to you for approval once we have a proposal that has the specificity that you're looking for, but that logically tracks from the recommended strategies, goals, settings, and populations that we've laid out that we would like to address.
And you might not have an answer to this question, but it is something that I will most likely be following up with at the next work session around this, around who you think would make up the committee for selecting proposals ultimately, whether that's staff, county, city staff, and if the advisory council will continue to be part of that selection process.
Yeah, we do have the advisory council certainly being involved in the ongoing monitoring and evaluation, determination about whether we're getting the desired outcomes, et cetera. But there are a lot of administrative functions that we would like to handle at the staff level just to make sure that we are, following our P code, following the state procurement code, et cetera. And we certainly have members of the advisory council who are representing certain factions, but they might be aligned with service providers who would want to bid on some of these things. And so we have to be very careful to make sure that we maintain the integrity of the process and what we'll propose to be for evaluators.
Yeah, yes, that's exactly why I'm asking, for sure. Thank you, Barbara, I appreciate it. Councilor Flores, did you have another question?
Yes, thank you. So Barbara, is there a need to work closely with the state, or will our local, county, city people here, our group, be working closely with the state? And what exactly, or in terms of, making, because, making sure that the dollars we do have are stretched and they're effective. So it's a question of not having overlapping, like everybody jumping in, and it's like, everybody's focusing on one thing and then everything else is falling by the wayside. And the reason I'm concerned about the state, with all due respect to the hard work of most of our senators and our representatives, the money for, like a lawsuit, the big Yazzie Martinez lawsuit, the money still hasn't been implemented for the children. And that lawsuit's as old as, well, not as old as I am, but definitely it's sitting there. So I'm just concerned that, the state isn't going to move on it. I know that you will. I know the city will, and because you're on that committee, I know that you keep people on their toes, Barbara, and I appreciate that. And you really follow through, and I appreciate that. And so I think, is there going to be any oversight in terms of the state coming through?
Thank you for the question, Mayor Pro Tem and Councilor Flores. The state is allocating funds through a number of their departments. We know what they are allocating it for generally. For example, they are allocating medication-assisted treatment in prisons. So that's the setting that they're looking at. They're allocating mental health for infants, for example, initiatives. Some facilities, a children's psychiatric hospital in Albuquerque, hepatitis community health outcomes program. So we know the programs that they're going through a number of different entities at the state. I actually would love to have someone at the state that I could speak to that would be the opioid settlement czar, I don't know what, to get that understanding of what their plans are so that we don't duplicate efforts. We are, to the best of our ability, reviewing all the information that we have so that we can leverage our funds and not duplicate efforts. And I think we can do that, again, by understanding what the state is allocating. I would love to have a point person there. We don't right now. We did go up and testify at the Health and Human Services Legislative Committee last November about the collaborative efforts going on around the state, the Albuquerque Bernalillo County, the Las Cruces Doña Ana County, the 7 counties collaborative as well, so that the state could know what we were doing and where we were. And we anticipate that we'll be going back to talk about our efforts. And I know that we will all be interested to hear in whatever way, shape, or form we can get at the information about what the state is going to be doing, because that will always play a part in how we make our determinations about funding. But again, I'm going to go back to what we did at the very beginning of this effort, is that community needs assessment we did says what is needed in our community. That's what we need to focus on. Sometimes if we say, oh, the state is funding medication-assisted treatment, it may be in a different setting. It may be in a different way, and we may just need more of it. That's not to say they're going to take care of all of it either. So it's certainly something that on an ongoing basis we're going to have to evaluate and continue to partner as much as we can. And that's why I'm grateful that one of our advisory council members is from the Department of Health. So we have connections, numerous connections, and we will use all the connections that we can in order to get the information that we need in order to do the best work for our community.
Thank you very, very much.
Thanks,
Thank
Barbara.
you.
Actually, before we move on, I just caught my note here. You mentioned, Barbara, as an example, potential for an internal, perhaps, use of the funds for Narcan for police and fire. And you don't have to have this information today, but I'd be grateful if you could get us information from both fire and police on what that looks like right now. What does acquiring Narcan for public safety in the city look like right now in terms of budget and how long that lasts?
Absolutely, yeah. We've already had those discussions, and I know Chief Daniels has provided me some information as well, but we will make sure that we understand what that landscape looks like as well. We know that at the federal level, some of the funds that were previously allocated for Narcan may not be coming as well. So that's another set of information that we need to stay on top of that might cause us to pivot and where we're focusing
For sure,
funds
for
as
sure.
well. So yes, that is definitely already in the works to get
Okay.
that information.
Yeah, but internally, for sure, that'd be
Yep.
great for council to understand that current context. Thank you. That was it for me. Anybody else? And I'll open it up to public comment. Anyone want to come up? And come on up. And we'll give you 3 minutes. And don't forget to state your name, please.
Good afternoon, Shara Thorpe, Doñana County, HHS. Good afternoon, counselors, staff. You want to raise it? We good? You guys can hear me? Okay, great. I just wanted to let everybody know as far as what the county's doing with the schools. HHS, our department, has been in Las Cruces Public Schools for the last 20 years, and we continue to meet with Las Cruces Public Schools for evidence-based programming. So we do have several programs already in the schools, and I just, excuse me, wanted to speak about when we had our workshop, we talked about not including these school-based because we didn't want to duplicate any efforts that were currently happening or that are going to be happening. But I wanted to just mention that even though we excluded it for initial recommendations, it does not mean that we would not include it in another phase. It's just for our initial recommendations, we did not include the schools just due to those other programs that we had in the schools. So I just wanted to speak to that and let you all know that HHS is in the schools and that there is some evidence-based programming happening there already. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much for that context. Other folks, come on down. If you want to speak, make your way down to the front. Okay. Forever hold your peace. Just kidding.
Okay, nobody else. Hello, council. My name is Trent Scribner. I want to thank everybody for coming out today. I lived in Las Cruces my whole life. I always say I work in healthcare right now. And more importantly, I've had family and friends, a lot of family and friends who have been, addicted to drugs, opiates and whatnot, what have you. So this conversation means a lot. Working in healthcare, I think that our priorities are good here. It seems like we want to cast like a wide net with screening, with universal screening for everybody, which is good. The important thing with universal screening in the healthcare setting, which usually you'll meet these people in the emergency department, is making sure that we have follow-up available for them. So follow-up with counseling, and I think this is a really good opportunity to kind of get all of the disparate nonprofits and city organizations together so we know what resources are accessible to people. The hospital maintains a list of what resources we refer people to, but having something kind of more central to refer them to would be very helpful. I think that education, prevention education in the schools is very good. I wasn't a fan of the old DARE model because everyone I know who won the contest did drugs later on, but Chief Story was right that the new DARE model, I think they call it like keeping it real or something, is backed by the evidence, which is good because we have the numbers to back that up. And I know a lot of people who, if they had had these programs, and more importantly, had like the follow-up again with counseling and with city services and state services, because really it's an issue of poverty, and you want to coordinate, uplifting them from. If you want them to stop doing drugs, you got to feed them first. I just wanted to express my support for everything that we're doing here, and I'm excited to see the implementation of it because I'm impatient. Thank you.
You just called out all your friends. Thank you. Come on up, Tanika.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem, City Manager, City Councilors, Chiefs. My name is Tanika Sosa Gonzalez. I'm a board-certified psychiatric mental health nurse. I'm an alternate on this team, but I've been working in mental health and working with people with opiate use disorder for over 15 years and a great, vast lived experience as well. And so I just wanted to share with you all that one of the things that was been a firm point of discussion amongst the Opiate Council is where are those other funds coming from? So with transitions in CARA and transitions in CYFD, we're really trying to look at where the gaps are and where we can fit in and not duplicate those services, and also be mindful of workforce shortages, right? So where we can make the biggest impacts. And I think a lot of us are having really great discussions with people in other communities. I recently had a really remarkable discussion with the deputy chief from Tucson. They're doing 2-hour post-Narcan follow-ups. So I think that things are written broadly enough that we'll have some opportunity to be really innovative and also be really mindful about monitoring and reporting back. I think that the proof is in the pudding, and that's kind of I think a lot of us where we're focused. And the term community is used broadly. I think it's used broadly intentionally, and also when we talk about schools, it is that SEL model. Everybody loves DARE, not so much science to support DARE. However, lifelong healthy changes associated with social emotional learning, evidence-based social emotional learning, doesn't just impact substance use disorder. It impacts outcomes for risky youth behavior, for long-term health choices. So those are all things that impact our community that can broadly be used when we're working together with our community schools and community providers. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Anyone else? Well, again, thank you so much to this council who's provided so much information. And Barbara has one more thing she wants to say before I move on.
I apologize. I just wanted to follow up with some recent news. I want to clarify that the settlements that we are talking about right now, in terms of the $10 million we're expecting to receive, do not include the Purdue Pharma settlement that was just announced last week. That's over $7 billion that will be distributed to local governments and medical providers and individuals. And so that is separately in the works. My understanding is, and Brad, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that we're going to be working with the state attorneys general to opt in to these settlements. I believe we're going to have until the end of September to make that decision. And then the bankruptcy judge is expecting to approve a plan in the November timeframe if enough parties sign on by that time. And so hopefully in the fall, we'll have more information about an additional funding stream that's resulting from the Purdue Pharma settlement. So just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. Do you know if that has the same timeline, 10 years?
It's over 15 years right now is what I'm hearing, so it will be extended as well.
Thank you, Barbara, for the update and for all your work on this project. Thank you so much. Okay, if there are no other questions, thank you all so much. Look forward to our August get-together. And we move on to item 3.2, this is public input needed, Metropolitan Redevelopment Area Plan Overview for El Paseo and South Solano. Presenting this will be Elizabeth Teeters and our consultants.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem and City Council. For the record, my name is Blair Flores, and I'm with the City of Las Cruces Economic Development Department. We are here today to present the El Paseo and South Solano Metropolitan Redevelopment Area Plan, which has been prepared by Sites Southwest over the past year. At this time, I'd like to introduce Allie Caskey and Danny Wilson from Sites Southwest, who will provide a more detailed overview of the plan and its contents. Thank you.
Thanks, Blair.
All right, good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem, City Councilors. Thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon to hear back on this plan. We're excited to be here. And before we get into some of the overview of the plan and where we are today, let me introduce myself formally. My name is Danny Wilson. I've had the pleasure of meeting with several of you over this planning process. Thank you so much up front for the time and energy you've already given to this. Definitely a group effort on this one, and after just over a year of working on this, we're really happy to be back here today with our draft plan. But I'm going to also have my coworker Allie introduce herself before we get going.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Allie Caskey. I'm a community planner with Site Southwest. I've been working alongside Danny throughout the over a year-long process of this plan, and really excited to be here this afternoon. Thank you.
Yeah. So hopefully at this point you all have seen the plan. It's currently posted on the city's MRA website for public comment and review, and we've received several really good questions and comments coming through that portal. So we won't get into too much detail about the plan itself. We're going to begin to focus on the process that got us here today, some of the community engagement that we've had along the way, and then finally we're going to focus more on the strategies and recommendations, and more importantly, what are the next steps for city staff and for the community to make sure that this plan doesn't just sit on the shelf, but rather is taken into the hands of those people who have stewarded it along this last year and moves forward in beginning that transformation process for the El Paseo South Solano area. So also on our team, I wanted to highlight some of our folks who put a lot of effort into this, including Civic Plan Studio. So they're an urban design team, Jay and Mike, some of you may have met already, who helped us begin to bring the vision for this space to life through their drawings. We worked with RCL Co., who provided a really in-depth market analysis to make sure that any recommendations we have for future development are really grounded in what the reality is on the ground, what's the potential for future growth in terms of commercial and residential and mixed-use development. And then finally, Wilson and Company was our engineer on board, and so specifically when it comes to streetscape design and redevelopment, they were helping us to ground those recommendations and what's happening on the ground, what we needed to do in terms of meeting the capacity levels of the roads that we're looking at, while also making them more pedestrian friendly. So this is just a quick look back at the original MRA project area. We'll talk about this a little bit later as we get into recommendations, but we ended up expanding this original boundary down to University for consistency as we're thinking about our design recommendations. There's a lot of things that we think about when it comes to El Paseo, that could apply to University Avenue, and we wanted to make sure that those design decisions were aligned accordingly. And then just a quick look back at that timeline. So way back in March of 2024, we began this process with our initial evaluation of the site and area. We met with staff, and we had this technical review team of different departmental staff who guided us along the way. And then we also hosted focus groups for key folks like developers and realtors, business owners, nonprofit and institutional representatives that really helped us to ground our first understanding of what are the issues in this area, as well as the opportunities for the future. In June and September, through September, we took all that information and created an existing conditions memo. And this was something that we turned into a briefing book for folks who participated in our September workshop. So we had a multi-day workshop where there were multiple touch points with the community to engage and begin to provide their feedback. And it also allowed us to quickly iterate on that and come up with some interesting solutions, even at that point, that we were able to then flex on for the next several months. Through the fall and winter, this was a lot of our planned development time, so lots of drafting of those recommendations, and that was further guided by a community survey that we'll talk about in a minute. And then finally, we're in this period of review and plan finalization. So we've gone through a round of review with staff, and the plan is currently open for public review until the 27th of June. And then I just want to take us back up to that 30,000-foot level really quickly and talk about the whole point of this. So why is this plan important to the city? And ultimately, we want to make sure that we're building on the many years of work and energy that's already gone into thinking about El Paseo and the role it serves the city of Las Cruces, and begin to expand that out into the neighborhood and areas around it. And ultimately, we want to make this framework that will help the city to take the steps to transform this area into a economically thriving and pedestrian-friendly area, something that both harkens back to how people remember El Paseo and the days of cruising El Paseo back when that was a really popular activity on the weekends, to how do we begin to evolve that into a future that meets the needs of residents nearby. That will all be grounded in sustainable development practices as well as equitable growth to make sure that everybody's benefiting from these transformations that we're talking about. And then a few of the goals that we want to achieve through this program is also highlighted on the right. So in addition to that revitalization, thinking about the infrastructure investments that the city should be making along the way, whether that's in street design or in park rehabilitation or trail assessments, there's a lot of ways that the city could begin to invest that money. We'll also think about public health and safety. This is really a point that I think is a little bit more programmatic. It's not necessarily the physical transformation, but it is equally as important because it begins to drive how people feel in that space, how people come down and use the space. And ultimately, that will show the success or not of this transformation in the end. We don't want to forget social equity along the way. As I mentioned, we want this to benefit residents who are directly there first, and then of course the businesses, the visitors, those workers who are coming to the area as well. And then environmental sustainability is kind of a given for us. We're a practice that is really grounded in both landscape architecture and planning, and so this is something that is really core to what we think about in our recommendations. And then historic preservation too. We know that there's a lot of buildings and neighborhoods that are really essential to the cultural identity of Las Cruces in this area, and we don't want to lose that along the way. And then I'm going to hand it over to Allie to talk a little bit more about the tools of the MRA, what it is, and how it can benefit the city.
So to take an even further step back, what is an MRA? It stands for a Metropolitan Redevelopment Area, which is outlined in a state statute, which basically takes an area with blighted both physical and economic conditions, thinking about things like vacant storefronts, cracked roads, just poor housing outcomes, and looks at how the city can actually play an active role in redeveloping this area. The plan will include specific projects which will help target investments related to those initial conditions. That's defined within the designation report. And so back in March of 2023, there was an initial report you all reviewed, which described those conditions and thus proving the need for kind of this planning effort. As I mentioned, the MRA is outlined in the state statute. It's what the state refers to as a locally authorized exemption from the anti-donation clause, which is a fancy way of saying this area needs help and is in dire need of both public and private investment to guide that growth and rehabilitation of this area. And so through the designation process, this triggers our planning process, which then allows for a variety of tools, which we'll kind of talk through how the city can use to help implement these actual recommendations. As part of our planning process, an important question we had for residents, business owners, visitors is what should that redevelopment look like? We understand that there is kind of this defined issue, and so how can we make recommendations that will help address those issues and provide the outcomes we're looking for? And so we employed a variety of engagement tools, really hoping to meet folks where they're at, beginning in quite early in the planning process with those initial listening sessions and stakeholder meetings with different business owners, property owners, institutional and community groups, hoping to just get kind of that initial sense of what are those needs. Moving into our community design workshop, we started to answer the question, and what could that redevelopment look like based on our needs? As Danny mentioned, we hosted a 3-day, pretty intensive design workshop, inviting residents, business owners, any interested parties to come and, again, workshop through these ideas to kind of get their hands on this plan and help make, just for more solid recommendations. We were able to engage the local high school as well, helping students also get excited about redevelopment in their community. And so just meeting a variety of folks at that process. We launched a community survey in the late fall where we received over 2,000 responses. We were able to send a survey and a reminder to every single property within the MRA, letting folks know, again, the information that they would need, as well as incentives to take the survey. We also partnered with city staff to pass out over, 500 flyers through food banks. And so, again, being able to go directly within the MRA and meet the folks who need those services and be able to, again, seek their input in that way. And we are still currently allowing for engagement. We have, as mentioned, the draft plan available on the city MRA website that's been open for a few months now, closing at the end of this week, which allows members of the public to access the same draft plan you all saw, leave comments, and actually engage with neighbors and other folks who've left comments. And so this also being kind of the transparent process, but also to allow for kind of continued comment. And so I just wanted to touch on quickly what we heard. Overwhelmingly, not just within all of our one-on-one conversations and community meetings, this data is pulled specifically from that survey, but echoes a lot of what we heard, which is that the highest priority for this area, the biggest need, is to improve safety and security. This includes things like not only police kind of response times and connections to the neighborhood, but also things like improving lighting so people feel safe at night, improving the sidewalks, thinking about how the physical form can help make folks feel safe and welcome. Following, the second priority is looking at the opportunity to transform El Paseo into this kind of bring back the life of this corridor, and thinking about how we're connecting the university and downtown is, again, a vital corridor. How can we begin to reimagine that as part of this redevelopment process? Third, most important, thinking about the neighborhoods that exist within the MRA. It is a large area, and it encompasses several different institutions, neighborhoods, business corridors, and so folks were interested in seeing their neighborhoods, their communities improved, things like storefront facades. We mentioned sidewalks, helping with landscaping in the area. And then fourth, I just want to call close behind, we also spoke a lot with local business owners who shared kind of what that specified support might look like along the El Paseo and South Solano corridors to be able to provide kind of strategic recommendations related to those businesses. And I will pass it back to Danny.
Okay. So we also wanted to highlight the illustrative vision that was developed as part of that engagement process. This is something that, as Ali mentioned, the whole area in its entirety is rather large, much bigger than MRA areas are traditionally. Usually you kind of focus on a corridor and then expand out from there. But in this case, both from the community and from staff, we understood that the neighborhoods in between those corridors are just as important as the corridors themselves. So wanted to highlight that first and foremost. But in order to begin to focus that vision for this entire area, we wanted to not lose that emphasis on the corridors themselves. So both El Paseo and South Solano as these key connections between downtown and the university. As Ali mentioned, in terms of pedestrian safety, that was one of the key issues that came up. And if you look at the crash data from the city, it reinforces that, that these are very dangerous corridors if you're not in your vehicle. And then not to be lost in that, Idaho and then Bautzen, Missouri kind of follow equally there. And so we know the city is already thinking about these key corridors and improvements that can be made. And we just wanted to provide a little more direction on how to begin to do that. Related to that, corridor redevelopment is encouraging the actual development on the corridor. So thinking about a healthy mix of commercial and residential development that could begin to spring up, especially along El Paseo, where you do have the land to begin to support that. So we're imagining this space as sort of, again, that vibrant services connector between these two nodes, between downtown and the university, that eventually will begin to fill those needs that the city already has for housing, as well as for additional commercial services. And then the next one is just a little bit redundant there in terms of overall development, but we kind of imagine South Solano as a slightly different creature when we're thinking about what is most important to that corridor. It already has a very healthy infrastructure there in terms of small businesses, institutions, and really good close-by residential areas that are walkable to those businesses. However, those businesses could use some support as well. Oftentimes, they're historic, the structures that they're in are historic, and to be held to the same standards for development as new development is sometimes a bit of a burden, especially if you want to improve your business or improve your structure. So we're really thinking about how can we support those businesses, especially the long-term ones, to make sure they stay and retain that character of the area. As Ali mentioned, safety concerns are utmost for this plan, and that comes in the form of both physical safety when you're thinking about moving through the space, as well as just feeling like you're safe there. And so it's like there's the psychological component to that, and so we have some recommendations related to that. We see the green spaces and public spaces in the MRA area as some of the biggest assets here, and so we want to make sure that we're building on improvements that are already planned for Valley View Park, as well as Frenger and Gomez parks. And then we also want to think about some connections that could be made so that folks from the neighborhood can access these assets, and perhaps even take a trail one day up the Arroyo to Young's Park and some areas to the east of the area. We want to facilitate development not just on our corridors, but at some key infill sites that we saw, especially for residential. We'll look at that with our opportunity nodes. And then we want to make sure we're reinforcing the sense of history, character, and neighborhood identity along the way. We heard from lots of neighbors who are at various degrees of organizing themselves here. And for the most part, they're just looking for a little extra support from the city in doing the work that they're already continuing. So thinking about neighborhood cleanups, thinking about neighborhood signage, things that are pretty simple but can go a long way in beginning to build that stewardship and pride among residents. And then finally, we don't want to lose this sense of low-hanging fruit when it comes to our drainage ditches. We were fortunate to work with Elephant Butte Irrigation District along the way and think about how these might be opportunity sites for future pedestrian connections. And as I mentioned, we took this effort to try to break down the MRA area into what we're calling opportunity nodes, just to begin to focus those efforts. So again, we're not spreading resources and funding equally across the whole area, but rather looking at where can we have the biggest impact for the city's dollars that we're investing. And the first is what we're calling the Brickyard District or Valley View Park area. And so within and along that sort of Valley View Park extension, there's a few key properties that could be ripe for mixed-use development or residential development in the future. And so we've highlighted that within the plan. What we're calling Paseo Verdes in the Family Services District is sort of this larger area where the city is already making a ton of investments with the Paseo Verdes development of housing, as well as the Munson Center is already here and the library. Valley View Elementary School exists just on the southern bit of it. And then we also have the Boys and Girls Club and Family Youth FYI Innovations. I'm forgetting the I right now, thank you. Is also making key investments here. And so we want to make sure that we're building on those and recognizing the ripple effect that those investments can have when we're better connecting families to those service areas. The third area is what we're calling Foster Montana Residential. So we've got these sort of internal street networks that already have some good multifamily housing base there, good infrastructure, good architecture there, and actually some new development happening there as well as one key site that's already owned by the city where housing is going to be shifted over to Paseo Verdes. And so we see that as like a key opportunity area to begin to show an example of what good missing middle housing can look like here. And also think about some good pedestrian infrastructure investments that can be made to better connect those residents to the businesses and services they would want to access on El Paseo. And then finally, we're looking at the node around Frender Gomez Parks and then also kind of connecting eastward over to Solano. There's some key properties that are opportunity sites that we see for residential development. We have a few faith institutions who have expressed interest in being partners with the city in this work and further contributing to their community through the development of potentially residential housing or additional community services that could be of use to neighbors there. So we're going to get a little bit into the catalytic projects in a minute, but I wanted to highlight we had several actions that we recommended for the city under these strategic recommendation categories. To be quite frank, it's a little too much for us to get into in the time that we have here today, but I just wanted to highlight those categories for those recommendations that you can find within the plan. And I'm going to turn it over to Allie to talk a little bit about the catalytic projects we wanted to highlight.
So again, this is a large area and we don't want to spread the dollars thin. We want to think about what projects can make the highest impact and are the highest priority, as we heard from the assessments, but also from what we heard from folks in the community. So building on, again, this idea of catalyst, that these projects we've specifically called out to help really bolster the transformation of this area. We've identified these projects as building on existing momentum, which will help with the success of their implementation. Some of the stuff is already in the works. In other ways, the MRA designation can help support and implement these projects. And so we'll kind of talk through each of them, but this is, again, just to preface that these are highly transformative, highly impactful projects that we think would really serve this area well based on those guiding principles. And so first, to address kind of the largest consideration throughout the plan, we dedicate a chapter to public safety improvements. Specifically looking to build on what the city is already doing with cooperation from LCPD. We want to work together to extend and expand the programs that the police department is already providing. Different programs such as bike rodeos, the integration with schools. We also want to think about the infrastructure that the police department is looking to finalize the real-time crime center by the end of this summer, which will give not only the city more information about how to use public safety resources and also data related to crimes in specific areas, but this is also an opportunity to work with the business owners who we've heard suffer from the concerns around public safety in this area. So this is just one kind of particular way that we can use kind of the MRA to, again, bolster these programs. Not only, again, just the programmatic recommendations, but also infrastructure. If you're familiar with the idea of crime prevention through environmental design, that there's ways we can build our communities to kind of naturally deter crime. And so we want to think about opportunities there, including a police substation kind of located within one of our opportunity nodes, which could help, again, those kind of targeted, more specific needs in that area. We also are advocating for city policies which would help expand support services within this area, again, targeted to what we've heard from especially business owners about the needs in this area. With that, we formed great partnerships and friendships, quite honestly, with some of the businesses on how we can understand, again, how can we best serve their needs, and again, opportunities to use MRA funding and this designation to help support additional security in this area, not only helping the businesses feel more comfortable, but also helping visitors, customers, residents just feel more safe in this area with a little bit more targeted support. And then lastly, with the environmental design, we also want to think about opportunities for lighting, sidewalk improvements, shade, which help, again, mitigate a lot of the effects of crime that we can see in this area, especially when it gets hot in the summer. Second most important, well, I shouldn't say most important, they're not ranked, but a large project, a large lift that we recognize we're recommending is the transformation of El Paseo. And I want to think about the idea of transformative, that we are rethinking what this corridor both has been and what it could be going forward. We recognize, this is an expensive, heavy lift that would take to really transform the roadway to allow for more multimodal, pedestrian-friendly use. There's construction that comes along with any kind of road project, but we really see this as just a catalyst for this area, making this kind of key commercial corridor that not only goes through the area, but also connects to large communities in the city as we want to invest and target this money through the transformation of this corridor to build on the existing assets of downtown and NMSU, but then also within this area, thinking about how people are not only moving through the city, but also within the MRA itself. And so ultimately, we will be working on making a final recommendation to council, which would describe in more detail those design options. We've also been working hand in hand with engineers to think about, again, the feasibility of this project, what it could look like realistically, not just based on a vision of what we hope, but based on what is realistic and also allowable within the city. And with the next steps, being to continue through engineering and construction. This is an initial phase 1 design that will, again, be making more specific recommendations to in the plan, but just to highlight this as a really key project for the city to undertake. On that, we also want to think about the commercial and residential redevelopment that would happen alongside some of these roadway improvements. We are making recommendations that currently align with the new zoning code, which would, again, allow for mixed use, higher density along those key corridors where it's already more appropriate. We also want to work with existing businesses in the area to foster their needs and, again, address what business owners are seeing, again, along El Paseo and South Solano, recognizing that these are two very different commercial corridors and they'll have different needs as well. And so with El Paseo, we also want to think about how we can work with property owners in the area. This specific stretch is characterized by large parcels, and so the opportunity to further subdivide and allow for the development that we would like to see, including that mixed use commercial and residential. And lastly, we also want to use this plan to help attract the kinds of projects that will advance these goals. We want to, again, highlight development at the opportunity sites and utilize the public and private partnerships that the MRA allows to build what we hope to see in this area more specifically. I mentioned that we also want to think about South Solano just a little bit differently from the El Paseo corridor. Specifically with how we can support the businesses that are already there. Danny mentioned we already have great neighborhood character, good bones, but how else can we help support those businesses thrive in that area? And again, with just knowing that it's a little bit more of the residential smaller scale business corridor. Again, we worked hand in hand with business owners, specifically along the South Solano corridor, to better understand those needs, and we make specific recommendations in the plan related to that as well. As part of that, we also want to make sure that city processes allow for this flexible, pedestrian-friendly design, which already exists along the South Solano corridor, and so how can we uplift and protect the existing nature of that community alongside additional enhancements that support that design. And lastly, we want to make the recommendation of coordinating across city departments to look at the opportunity to explore some sort of business organization specifically for South Solano businesses, with recognition that these kinds of scale of businesses have different needs. And so we want to make sure we're continuing that conversation beyond the planning process and working to, again, build out this program and implement this. Okay, and I will pass this back to Danny to talk through the rest of the catalytic projects.
So I also want to recognize too in this the work that the city is already doing. I would say especially in regards to that last point, City staff already has many ideas and some opportunities in the work that we're in the works that we're going to highlight a little bit later. So again, this is not all coming from us from scratch. These are ideas and things that have been worked on over time. And so we're just trying to uplift that and make sure that we're supporting it through resources and funding that come with the MRA plan. So the next one is Valley View Park activation, and I would say this takes a very similar character to that last point I made, where the city is already making large investments in this park. There's funding for a master planning process that will get going here to begin to re-envision how Valley View can better meet the needs of the area, both students at the nearby elementary school, neighborhood residents, and then folks who are coming to some of those destinations we talked about. We started this conversation with EBID, and we're just recommending that the city continue that conversation to make sure that any future pedestrian connection or trail that the neighborhood might want to see be put in place, connecting that park to Young's Park eventually is what we envision to the east. And then finally, it's just implementing those plans, right? So after that master planning process goes through, it's continuing with that design and construction, and then finally activating with programming.
Sorry.
Oh yeah, do we need to pause here? Mm-hmm. Yes, I see. That's fine.
Thank you, Christine.
Yeah, that's
I'm
okay.
so sorry, I didn't mean to
No, that's a great
cut
point.
you right in the middle.
I had that thought, and then I kept going.
You know what? I also had that thought earlier, and I thought about telling people to hold it,
Yeah.
and I didn't. So thank you.
Oh, wait. Yeah. Yeah, maybe.
Folks, just a reminder that we need to have 4 of us up here to establish quorum in order for us to continue having any public conversation.
Okay.
So everyone else, please don't leave.
And I do promise we're almost done with the presentation.
No, take your time, thank you.
The last thing I just wanted to mention about this slide is that programming we also see is equally important to the physical infrastructure that's going into our community spaces. And so we want to make sure that we're activating these spaces, partnering with the local schools, the library, the senior center, to make sure that we're offering those activities that families want to see here. That's a lot of what we heard through our community outreach was that we just want more family-friendly, safe spaces and activities to do with kids. So something to highlight there. For recommendations for infill, what we're just calling broadly infill as redevelopment, this is looking at those areas outside of the corridor. So those key properties that are opportunity sites for either housing or mixed-use development. One, as I mentioned, in that Brickyards area, we're calling the Featherlight site, a really nice property that's immediately adjacent to the Las Cruces Arroyo and could be really great for future reinvestment after an environmental assessment is conducted there. We also want to support FYI's proposed mixed-use center that they're envisioning really close to Paseo Verdes off Campo and Sutherland Lumber. We want to just further advance that implementation of Paseo Verdes, so any connections that the city and the residents hope to see to that site, to those other amenities, we want to support through the MRA. There's a few key sites around the area that I mentioned in the Foster, Montana neighborhood, as well as further south in Frender Gomez Park, where we want to work with those property owners, whether they are whether they already have plans in the works for developing apartments that they just need to further get down the line, or whether they're these religious institutions that I mentioned who kind of have a dream of maybe furthering supporting the area through residential development but aren't sure exactly how to get started. That's something that the city can facilitate as well. Finally, we want to make sure that we're creating a smooth process for development to happen. So thinking about bolstering what the Design Review Committee is already doing at the city level, and thinking about further design assistance, support in aligning with the new zoning code, thinking about infrastructure support just to make that lift a little bit easier for developers. And then finally, we thought that it might be helpful to share a concise housing resource guide for potential future development. So again, it's just making it easier to do the things that we hope to see that have been outlined by the vision for this area. This is one of those low-hanging fruit items that I've already mentioned, but continue that collaboration with EBID to think about our trail connections both across the Las Cruces lateral and the Arroyo Trail Plan, and then also the park drain as well. Those are two opportunity sites for this. And then I know we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to talk more specifically about what that community and neighborhood placemaking could look like in terms of neighborhood support and stewardship. So we had a specific neighborhoods workshop as part of what we did back in September, and these were some of the thoughts that came directly out of that in terms of thinking about a signage program that might be in partnership with the local Las Cruces High School. There's a lot of ways that we can begin to involve folks just to help to reinforce that everybody has a role in this work, everybody has a purpose in transforming this area, whether you attend high school here or whether you live here. They could be a partner in helping to support the creation of those gateways, public art, neighborhood markers, signage. We want to continue to organize neighborhood cleanups, and whether that's happening at the scale of Lift Up Las Cruces or at the block, all of those are valuable moments to get people out talking amongst themselves with their neighbors, and also seeing the way that the city really cares and is reinforcing and supporting the energy they're putting into their block and their neighborhood. And then finally, we just want to make sure we have that staff capacity to continue to do this work. That's kind of step one, actually. Shouldn't be the third bullet point, because that is really where this originates from. We want to make sure we have the capacity and the resources at the city level to continue these good works, because they are important. And then I'm going to hand it off to Elizabeth to talk about our timeline here.
All right, good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem and City Council. My name is Elizabeth Teeters, and I am the Economic Development Director. And I'm going to quickly walk you through the timeline from here on out and our plans going into implementation of this plan. So first off, the plan will come in front of you for adoption on July 7th, and there will be 2 resolutions, one specifically for the plan, and we have to do a separate one for the extension of the boundaries. We are working on creating an internal MRA committee that we're hoping to have formed by the budget season around October so that it can move smoothly with the budget season, and I'll go into detail on the next slide about that. We were given, through the budget, $100,000 for a pilot program, so we're going to be using it on a program called Safety Improvement Program that we'll hope to have in place by September, and this will be used specifically for the El Paseo South Solano MRA. There may be some other MRA incentives that we will adopt around the same time. We've been working closely with the City of Albuquerque, who has quite a few MRAs, and they've given us a lot of tools that they use. So we're looking at those options, but both whatever programs we do create beyond the Safety Improvement Program, we will be doing, we hope to have active around September to actually start really pushing out to the El Paseo South Solano corridor. And then finally, the resolution for the GRT baseline and county property tax will be coming, where it starts they start keeping track in July 1st, so there's going to be about 6 months of data that they need, so January, February timeframe is when we'll be bringing that back for the tax increment. So let's talk about implementation when it comes to a committee. We've been talking a lot about how we are going to implement these plans, all the MRAs, as they all come online. And so we've decided what we're going to do is create an internal MRA committee. This committee will consist of directors or designated department representatives that the directors will designate. The staff will filter the projects based on capacity, priority, and funding. Recommendations will go to City Council, and this committee will also meet monthly to review and coordinate efforts. The idea we're kind of envisioning is similar to a CIP, so our CIP process, so it'll move along with the budget season. So City Council will be very aware of the recommendations that will be coming forward and the type of funds that will be available. And you know, this committee will be in charge of working with the public and working, even though not every project has to be clearly stated within the plan. So, you know, as we hear from the public and things change in the next 20 years, this committee will be in charge of making sure that we're keeping on track and we're getting everything done that we need to. And finally, I just wanted to do a map of the boundary extension. You'll see that it goes down to University. This will be the separate resolution at the City Council meeting that we will be doing just to extend that boundary. And I wanted you to see a clear picture of what that looks like. And with that, we are all here to stand for questions.
Thank you so much, all of you, Sites Southwest. Thank you for being on this ride along with us. I'll open it up to my colleagues for questions, and we have Councilor Graham.
Thank you so much. Before I forget, great document. Really appreciate the document design, just great presentation. I recognize that these are not all questions that may be able to be answered today, but if we could just kind of bookmark for future discussions in no particular order. I noticed a couple of points, largely around the South Solano corridor, where the report specifically mentioned that there were some zoning impediments to doing the most effective redevelopment. Specifically for those areas, will Realize help with that? And in a larger context, is Realize poised to empower the MRA writ large? And if not, what are some potential amendments?
Yeah, so that's a great point. And I should say we started updating points of the plan after Realize Las Cruces was approved, but I will say I think we need to go back with a fine-tooth comb and still double check on that, because the new zoning code does make that process easier for those property owners along South Solano. I think the more accurate description at this point would be that sometimes still with redevelopment, there's steps for the permitting process and certain assessments that need to happen along the way that are They don't discriminate between a large redevelopment project and a small redevelopment project, and sometimes that can be an additional time and financial burden on developers, particularly if they're small business owners in the South Solano area. So I think rather than, that's a really important shift to make, that it's not zoning per se, it's more that redevelopment permitting process that might, there might be ways that we can streamline that for these business owners and property owners along South Solano, but the plan should reflect that, so we'll make sure to take a look at that text.
Okay, great, thank you so much. Second, I know in both the report and the presentation, you talked about specific public policy recommendations that would help move this along. For instance, I noticed the allusion to vacant property ordinance, which I believe one of my colleagues is going to dig into a little deeper. But beyond that, what are we thinking?
Cool. Okay. No, the vacant property ordinance is a good one to bring up because that again is low-hanging fruit that other communities have used as a pretty effective tool where we want to be careful to balance both the carrot and the stick approach that we're using. That one's a little bit more of a stick, and in order to balance that, we want to make sure we're also providing the support and resources we need. And so thinking about how we might have some funding mechanisms that the city can use to help incentivize that rather than penalizing, I think, property owners who have those vacant properties. So we do want to use both here. I think also just thinking more broadly about policies that the city can consider to support some of the recommendations of the plan. Allie mentioned this when she talked about some of the public safety pieces. There are policies that we don't traditionally think of as tied to redevelopment, but when we think more broadly about the character and impact that this area has when we look at our social services and public services that we're providing, when we look at the policies that we have in place around safe and complete streets. These are all things that can be revisited. You know, I know the city has a safe streets ordinance, but it might be revisited and updated to better reflect the reality of what's on the ground, what developers can do, and the degree that the city can hold those developers accountable for creating the conditions for safe movement through the space. So those are kind of two areas that I think the city could consider in terms of policy updates and ordinance updates off the bat.
Great, thank you so much. And then are you going to jump in, Elizabeth? Please.
Sorry. Real fast, Mayor Pro Tem and Councilor Graham. The only thing I would add to what Danny was saying is taking a look at our infill policy. We haven't updated in a while, so looking at that, because that's going to impact almost all of our MRAs. So looking at that and seeing what could be updated, like Danny was saying, that can better help these vacant buildings or bringing buildings up to code, how we can fill in the infill. That would be another policy that I would consider looking at.
Great. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of a little more philosophical question, I guess. There's a lot of really compelling information here about neighborhood identity, community building, and as I'm reading through, recognizing that one of the things that makes this MRI unique is the per capita percentage of renters, huge compared to Doñana County as another, and recognizing renters are as great neighbors as homeowners. I was a renter now that I've lived here forever, I think I've finally outstripped my homeowner versus renter timeline, but there are challenges to affecting these kind of changes when you're going to necessarily have maybe a rotating cast of neighborhood members. So how do we as the city, as the one who's always going to be there, help to, and I think you already started to mention some of these things, neighborhood cleanups, block parties, but specifically, how do we leverage this in a renter-heavy area?
I think that one of the best ways to engage both renters and homeowners is to first shift the perspective, because I think there often is this bias against renters that they aren't perhaps as like worthy of some of the investments that we're thinking about and the programs that we're thinking about because they aren't going to be there long term. But especially in this area, considering the proximity to NMSU, you often have that large renting student population in addition to folks at other stages of life. And they are just as, I think, impacted by some of these things where it's less of looking at renters as a liability and more of looking at them as like, where can we find the opportunity here to create long-term connection, to create that sense of purpose and stewardship, especially among a younger population like students. And I think the first lesson that we took away and what we've taken away from the planning process is by meeting them where they are. And so by getting out into the community, whether that is through organized community events or in some of these spaces where they might come for services, whether that's the library, the Boys and Girls Club, the Senior Center, whatever the city can do to meet those residents where they are and show them how they have a place within the community. Whether that's by taking on a volunteer role or being involved in something that's happening in the future in these areas, in the park, wherever it might be happening. I think that establishing that sense of you all have a place and a purpose here, whether you rent or whether you own your home, is step one. And then beyond that, the idea is that eventually we're creating the opportunities to begin to shift those who want to move from renting to homeownership to do so. So by creating those mixed use, missing middle infill housing opportunities, maybe we can create the conditions where some of those renters will move into being homeowners in the future and staying in the neighborhood.
Thank you so much. That was lovely. And actually kind of a perfect transition for my final, kind of more of a comment, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it regardless. I think clearly an area isn't designated as an MRA if it's doing great in all aspects. You know, these are areas that need some reinvestment, some love, some attention. But I think I just caution all of us on the dais, in the community. I think we can fall into a narrative of, you know, oh, well, this is a problem area, this is a scary area, and I think that reframing that conversation, just like you said, like looking at this not as a liability, but as an opportunity. I think that is so important. And I think a lot of times, you know, I've gotten some pushback as I've been really advocating for the MRA throughout my time as a city councilor. People will say like, oh, well, you're just not being realistic. You're just trying to brush the problems aside, or you're not recognizing the realities. But if we continue to characterize these areas as blight or problems, then nothing will change. So much of what you're talking about is momentum, and how, relatively speaking, how one small catalytic spot, you know, Boys and Girls Club moving in, one small change in the stream can make such a big difference. So I hope that we will find great words to say about our El Paseo South Solano MRA. So thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Councilor Graham. Other folks with questions? Good, because I have a lot. Thank you again so much. I have a lot of chicken scratches, so maybe I don't have a lot. Maybe they're all going to be around the same thing. But I do want to just start with what I love, because I loved a lot. And I just couldn't be prouder that we're finally here. So I'm very excited. I do want to lift up I think one of the things that I loved the most was the catalytic project of El Paseo transformation, plus the opportunity site. I forgot what you called it, but it's the Paseos Verdes and Family Resource
Yeah,
Hub?
Family Services District is what we called it.
I
yeah.
loved it. No, I really loved that, and I think I love it because I think you captured the investments that we're already making, right? Like the commitment that we're already making to this part of the corridor with Paseos Verdes and our housing team, with our partnerships and great partnerships and resources in the community, like FYI and Boys and Girls Club, and so many other things. And so I just wanted to lift up that I really loved that synergy, if you will. I'm really excited about all of that. I think I am also, thank you for mentioning Realize. I think one of the pieces that I felt exciting while reading this was that I guess I do hope that you sort of go through Realize also and pick out the pieces, but one of the greatest things that I think people didn't see or didn't want to see and realize was how much of a focus it had on flexibility in the MRAs. And see staff back there is shaking their head because it was so intentional, because we have such a focus on these corridors. And so I think if your team does go back through it before you come back for adoption, I think you're gonna see a lot of alignment, again, because that was so intentional. So I'm very excited about that. I was also really happy to see that you had a chapter, if you will, on vacant properties. This is something I've been talking about quite a bit, and you talked about there being 90 vacant parcels plus 30 unoccupied buildings in the entire of the MRA. That's huge, and I'm sure, I just think that we must address this. Like, we have to address this, and I think folks like Albuquerque have sort of started paving a way on how we do some of that with the balance of what you said, right? The balance of the stick and the carrot. Certainly not punitive, and working with good actors, people who desire to do something with the property versus folks who have abandoned their responsibility. I think that's an uncomfortable conversation, but one that we need to have. And so I really appreciated your focus on that, and it is one of the policy priorities that I will continue to have is adopting some sort of ordinance on addressing vacant properties and unoccupied properties. One of the other pieces of policy recommendations that a constituent brought to my attention, thank you, Dawn, was around the CPACE program, which I actually connected with staff this morning, and they said they're coming to present in July. So lots of alignment there. But just to put it on you all's radar, CPACE is commercial property assessed clean energy, which is an alternative source of financing for improvements to commercial properties. It covers the direct and indirect costs related to reducing energy or water consumption, generating renewable energy, and building resiliency. Eligible properties include any privately owned commercial, agriculture, industrial, multifamily property with 5 or more dwelling units, and that includes nonprofit organizations. And the state adopted this as a policy, but counties and municipalities have to opt in. And so Albuquerque's done it, Santa Fe's done it, and so I'm hoping that that's what the July work session will be, the recommendation that we opt into this program that I think can be one of those incentives for our nonprofit partners, but also commercial folks who are already doing a lot in this area. Okay. I also wanted to lift up the impact fee reduction and demolition site fund that I thought was really important, and would love for us to continue having those conversations about what it would look like here. Okay, I'm getting through my list. Those were sort of my big statements, I guess. I had less questions, so my apologies. I think actually one of my big questions was, and maybe not, so I'm just giving you my input, I guess, less than questions. On public safety, actually, can you help me understand on public safety, what were some of the core concerns that people had? Was it like property crime? Mm-hmm. Was it, so folks who are unhoused, folks who are struggling with addiction, like what was the core of those concerns?
Yeah, so a lot of it came up as property crime. Mm-hmm. So especially for business owners, their employees not feeling safe, closing up the business and going into the parking lot on their own at night. So having, first of all, the infrastructure to feel safer there, but then also having a good connection with LCPD. So if something happens, they know they have that quick response that they can reach out to there. I think also what we heard too from residents was just the differentiation between what service is needed at a given time. So whether it's mental health services for somebody who's in crisis versus somebody who's actively trying to, break into their property or damage it somehow. So wanting to have a little bit more clarity on what to do as a property owner, as a resident, when you see that kind of a situation. And then I think from residents just across the board, there was this sense of we want to be able to more fully utilize our public spaces, but we don't feel safe/comfortable there. So that was where we got into some of our recommendations around lighting and shading and just creating that space where people can feel like they can be out and about and not have to worry about their safety.
Thank you. Yeah. I think sort of one of the pieces that I was sort of thinking about as you were presenting on that is that I want to make sure that we are holding this fine balance between safety not only meaning more police presence, right? Like safety has a lot more definitions, and I think we as on the city council and the city have, one, we want to acknowledge that people's fears are very valid. Like those concerns are incredibly valid and real. And I also want us to address them in the way that makes the most sense in terms of like what is actually going on, right? Yeah, sure, like property crime. I think the Real-Time Crime Center will absolutely help address some of that. I think if it's issues around unhoused, if it's issues around folks experiencing addiction and are on El Paseo South Solano, like how can we also put in this plan more weight on the kinds of things that will help address those specific issues outside of just policing? I think that, to me, that feels really important and necessary. And ensures that we're actually we're not burdening police department, number one, with things that, right, like they're not necessarily trained to do. But number two, pull in our partners like FYI, like Community of Hope, like other folks who are already doing a lot of that outreach work. And our housing department, right? Ultimately, if one of the biggest issues is homelessness, we're gonna meet that need when we build more housing. So I just wanna lift up that piece around public safety, us having a wider scope on that. I was also thinking about the heat map index on El Paseo and how that's a form of violence, right? Like people experiencing disproportionate amounts of heat, whether it's their homes or walking, not feeling safe crossing the street, not having bus shelters. Like those are also things that, to me, hit at public and community safety that I wanted to make sure I lifted up. And so I don't know, Elizabeth, what the safety improvement program would look like, but I want to just make sure that we are sort of creating that program with some of those principles in mind as well. Let me do a quick scan of my notes to make sure that I got everything. And then my only other recommendation would be that the MRA committee that is created, that we do include someone from the NAT team on there, the Neighborhood Action Team or the Nuisance Abatement Team, given hopefully the priority we have on addressing vacant and occupied properties. Thank you so much for allowing me to just talk at you the whole time. I appreciate it.
No, they're good comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just so invested in this, and I think our entire council is, and the whole city, and making redevelopment and revitalization such a priority. So I really appreciate you all being here. I'm excited for July, and I'm excited to send off whatever the state needs for us to start collecting that data. Thank you so much. Okay. Yes, Councilor Matisse.
I just really appreciate the research that you've done. And I've only been on city council for about 13 months. And I've watched El Paseo and Solano deteriorate over the last 12 years. With your experience and professionalism, how does a city prevent? I mean, you brought up the public safety issues, which is very important. You brought up private partnerships, again, which is important. And there's very wealthy private enterprises like the gas and oil company that could help us with investments. And you brought up other items like neighborhood associations and strengthening them. How do you prevent, what would be the best opportunity for the city to work on that we don't see another El Paseo, we don't see another Solano? What do we need to be doing, not only on the public safety issues, because if you don't have a safe city, you have a problem. But could you indicate what other things we could be doing so we don't have a Telshore or another area going into blight, into unsafe feelings?
Yeah, I mean, I have some ideas, and then I also might hand it over to staff if there's some ideas as well. But
Thank you.
I do think that, so it's good to recognize the context in which we're presenting this plan. You know, this is one tool that the city can use that offers flexibility for infusing resources and funding in an area that's already demonstrated that kind of deterioration that you're talking about. And when we think about how that came to be over many decades and how that might happen in another area, I think there's a lot of influences at play. And some of that the city has control over, and some of that the city does not. I think a large part of it is just recognizing when it comes to development decisions, developers are going to go where they have the potential for the greatest profit and the fewest barriers. And so in the case of city cores, especially historic city cores, there's often constraints there, you know, because of the way the road network was laid out, because of the way the parcels are, that make it a little bit harder to develop in an already built out area versus going to, say, the fringes of a community or to the county. And so that's one reason why you sort of see a shift often in the spreading out of our cities, is because it's just easier to develop on the fringes. It's cheaper and you have to go through less hoops. That's why also in the MRA plan, we do talk about how to reduce those barriers. City's well on its way with the new zoning code, but as we mentioned, there are some things in terms of permitting processes, in terms of looking at the infill development ordinance that the city could do to further reduce those barriers so that we're making it easier for that development to happen and to continue to expand in areas where it might be a little bit more physically constrained. So I think that's one thing the city can do. It's not just in the MRA area, but any part of the city that's older, any part of the city that has maybe some of those additional constraints. That's step one. I think also too, it's just, there's a lot of forces that are a little bit beyond the city's control. When we look at just overall patterns of growth and development, policies that have happened at the state and federal level that just make it easier for people to hop on highways and drive into the city rather than making their home there and building it up. And so some of that is just out of the hands of the city, I would say, and has come from decades of city planning that doesn't necessarily incentivize regrowing and redeveloping in our cores. I guess that's kind of a bigger answer that doesn't give you a ton of tools to work with, but maybe one starting point with reducing those barriers.
No, that's excellent. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? Great. I'm going to open it up to public comment now. You will each get 3 minutes. And just, make yourself come on down. Don't forget to state your name.
Good afternoon. I'm George Pearson. I'm Vice President of Cruces, which is a local bike ped advocacy organization. The plan lays out 6 plan goals, and so I'm just going to touch on each of those in my comments about this. First is economic revitalization and housing. Well, it's not just housing costs, but transportation costs that affects the cost of living. For example, cost of owning a car is about $10,000 a year. If you can remove a car and replace it with a bicycle or other modes of transportation, active transportation nodes, and I think there needs to be more emphasis on the other active transportation modes, maybe laid out at the goals and in the beginning, including bicycles and transit. The MRA area is easily 3 miles across, which is a very easy access by bicycle. And improved transit would be wonderful. Imagine having 15-minute headways where you have a bus access that's very easy. Infrastructure improvement is the next one. Improved bicycle facilities need more consideration. Identifying a protected bike lane between the university and downtown is something that we really need to look at. On public safety and health, safe, secure bike parking is something that we need to look at. This will result in more bicycling trips, and that will result in the health benefits that are enjoyed by people that use active transportation. A longer lifespan has been identified as a benefit of more active transportation. On the social equity side, roughly a third of the residents do not have a driver's license for whatever reason. Either they're too young to drive, too old to drive, or other things have happened. So they have to rely on somebody else for transportation. So better active transportation solutions helps with social equity. Environmental sustainability, well, that's active transportation is just the obvious answer to that. And on the historic preservation, I think something that was talked about in the body but not really in the goals is fostering neighborhood identities. And so I want to say, reflect, it is a great document all in all. And I especially like the way it's broken up into the smaller areas, identifying what can be done there. So thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, George.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. My name is Ashley Echavarria. I'm the CEO for the Boys and Girls Club Las Cruces. I was equally excited to see that little area named as the Family Services District. It's exciting. I think it's an exciting step in the direction that we're headed. We're really excited to be moving to the area. And to be, quite frankly, I think a little bit further along in the process than the entire MRA. Of course, we're still working on getting things funded, but we're really, really hopeful that we'll be able to break ground this year. That's truly the goal. But, I just wanted to come in. I was watching online and I thought, I just want to come in and let you guys know, we appreciate the partnership with the city. And we're so open to any other ways that we can partner together to make sure that we're getting this redevelopment done as quickly as possible and in a way that benefits the entire community. So when we, I think about the public safety concern, and I hear a lot of that. Oh my goodness, you're moving the Boys and Girls Club to that area. But I like to look at it on the positive side. I see us as being kind of the headliner, if you will, to going in there. Yeah. And so, I want to say, Chief Story, if there's any possibility, I was thinking about community policing. Well, we're building the facility in such a way we'll have extra office space. What if we had a police officer office out of the Boys and Girls Club from time to time, and then there's, presence in the area? But any other way we can collaborate. We've designed the building in such a way that the gymnasium is accessible from the back end. So if we can partner with Parks and Rec, for the league sports or for anything else, that's really what we want to be. We want to be a place that is community minded. And, as you know, the longer the buildings sit empty, the more concern we have. So, any support that we can get from the city, we'd be grateful for just to get this project going. I think as soon as, people start seeing activity out there, hopefully some of the issues will stop. We have had squatters in the building, we've had a fire in the building, we've had quite a few things going on there, and we just want to get the project going. We can't get the project going until we're at a certain dollar amount. And so I just wanted to say thank you guys for what y'all have done for us so far, and we're definitely looking forward to working together in the future, and anything we can do to move the MRA plan along. We're here, you're behind us. I think most of you know this has been my goal for the last 12 years, so we're really hopeful to make this happen soon.
Thank you so much. You're absolutely a catalyst in the area, so thank you. Come on down.
Hello, Trent Scribner, for the record. The MRA is a big area. Like I know it seems maybe like a small area because it's a small town, but that's huge. And it's like kind of different needs and different stuff going on in each part along El Paseo there. So when I talk, I'm mostly talking about the Foster, Montana area because that's where my family stays. I spent a couple years living there. I've lived everywhere. I'm a renter, which, but I think that we have really good priorities for the area. Lighting is a concern. Public safety is a serious concern, and stuff like lighting that's, again, evidence-backed, especially around Foster, going towards like the business complexes like Crunch, Albertsons, all that, because that's a place people walk along. And it's, I used to run like from my place over there to the Crunch, and running there I felt real good because I was all hyped up. On the way back, I'm weak and it's dark, and I'm like, oh man, they're gonna get me. And a street light would have helped out a little bit. Vacant lots too, that's again evidence-backed. They did a study, I think it was in Flint, Michigan. They started taking vacant lots and putting like greenery on them, but just making them look pretty much. I'm not all about like broken windows theory, but making these vacant lots look pretty and kind of involving the people at every step of the way. It reduced violent crime in the area by about 40%. That was a 2018 study in Flint, Michigan. And so it's effective and it's cheap. It's cheap, effective, and humane, which is what we want. I was curious, and this is kind of just like I'd kind of like to know what the percentage of responses back we got was from the survey that you guys sent out to the from the surveys that you guys sent out to the community. Regardless, I think it's representative of what people want over there from what I've heard from them. What else? I was really happy that you worked with the schools, that you worked with Las Cruces, because those kids are like, it's the only place you see people walking, because from Las Cruces High, they go and they hang out along El Paseo, and they're keeping it alive down there. God bless them. Yeah, cleaning up the vacant lots is good. Holding these people accountable for like the untended properties. I think that we've relied a lot on private investment to bring life into communities, and you can't rely on private investment really. The 2008 recession hit hard in that area because private investors were like, oh, you guys are broke, let's get out of here. 2020, COVID hit hard in that area because when things are hard, private investment goes. And so if you want resilient communities, focus on public investment is a principle that I would have moving forward. And I think that you guys are embodying that very well. I wrote down a bunch of stuff. Otherwise, I'm real happy about the Boys and Girls Club. I was down there at the graffiti event that they did, and that was beautiful. People from the community showed up, like real people who don't usually go out, like the teenagers and stuff who think that stuff is lame. And so I think that we're doing really good things down there. Turn the Payless into something cool. Don't turn it into a real estate office. Thank you.
Thank you. And do you just want to point out that it wasn't just Las Cruces High School, it's also Las Montañas High School, which I really love. Come on down.
Good afternoon, Council, Mayor Pro Tem, Axel Hale for the record. I would like to say that I agree with Councilor Graham about us framing this as an opportunity area rather than a problem area. I think we have such a rich culture stemming from the downtown market area and the Mesquite Historic District not too far. And I think expanding that into El Paseo is very possible. And I think we're starting to see it with local businesses like Deputy Dogs moving in there. That being the only El Cometa we have in town over there off El Paseo. To see that culture grow into something similar to what we see downtown, where you regularly have people gathering, where you have people gathering in the historic district near Klein Park. I think there's a lot of possibility there, and I really do like what they're doing with it, with public investment and bringing in those services that are so heavily needed in that area. I've also lived in Las Cruces my whole life. I used to shop at that Payless, so I would like to see that turned into something meaningful. I think the vacant properties, focusing on that I'm also on board with that, because by reducing those and bringing in things there, whether it's public sustainability, agriculture stuff, more focused on those programs, I think having more there, creating that presence where it feels less empty and vacant will help bring that new sense of life into this area of the town. I used to work on El Paseo. I worked at that Arby's for a number of months, so I know how it gets down there. And what Mr. Scribner was saying about the students from Las Cruces High School, they very much are keeping it alive. Of course, Las Montañas worked with a local film not too long ago, and seeing what they're creating over there is also very meaningful. So to see all of this incorporated into something that the entire public can come together in meaningful ways to address is very promising. And those public safety concerns, as you were saying, the heat mapping is so important over there because you don't have any of that shade right now. There's don't quote me, but I think there's one bus stop on El Paseo. And I feel like it's very much viewed as a travel-through area than a stop-in area. It's, okay, I'm going from this part of town to university. So to turn that area into something more meaningful where the public can commune is something that is super important. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Other folks? Come on down.
Hi, good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem and councilors. My name is Don Kurtz. I live on Missouri in Las Cruces. And first, I just want to congratulate the consultants on this plan. I think it's really good, and the input that came from stakeholders and the council and staff was good too. And I feel like you were very flexible in trying to incorporate those things. And anyway, I think it's a great plan. I'd like to just make a couple of comments on sections of it. It seems like I've always been especially interested in the El Paseo corridor. And it seems like we're kind of putting together the holy trinity of a successful area there, where you have the housing, which brings commercial activity to support the housing, which in turn attracts more housing. And then holding it all together, in my view, is the transit, which we have an opportunity there, I think, to piggyback on the value of that corridor just to connect the university and that whole work student area with downtown and that whole work area. And one thing on housing, I think I want to follow up on comments by Councilor Graham and the young man earlier. I think we want to be careful not to unconsciously or consciously designate this as a low-income area, because the opportunities for housing along there are tremendous, for student housing, for senior housing, for young professional housing, and the major employment centers there are right along that corridor. Las Cruces Public Schools, the high school, the university, and then at the other end, electronic caregivers. And so I think the opportunity there for housing is much larger than, but I got to say at the same time that the whole idea of the Paseos Verdes and the Family Services District is great. So we're talking mixed income housing of all kinds. Secondly, on the transit, this is something that's come up repeatedly over the years. I think when we think about transit, I'd like us to have Roadrunner be thinking about this from the very beginning. Direct service from the university convention center area to downtown and back, and frequent enough that people can count on it to get to work, to go to class, and you don't, to go directly on this, have to loop way out to the east or way out to the west, which is what we kind of have to do now. So that kind of short line service every 15 or 20 minutes, for students it's great. For coming to the entertainment districts downtown, I think we could get DWI funds to help support that kind of transit. And finally, I appreciate you saying, and I think we all know this is a heavy lift, but hey, you know what? You guys have done it before. When I think of what downtown was a dozen years ago and what it is now, that was a city initiative that was bold and broad and went after it. And I hope you'll do it here, and I think it can be done. So I appreciate it. I really congratulate all of you on the work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Don. One more person? I mean, more people can come, but I just saw one more.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem, Council. I am Allison Neal Wallace. I'm a resident of District 4, and I work in the MRA area at one of the faith communities. I won't say which because I'm not supposed to officially represent, but I do actually see two gentlemen from our community in this photo here, which is nice. Something that we have faced, we are on South Solano and just off of the corner of South Solano and Missouri, or I guess it's the Bout side, but we did face some of that property crime that was mentioned when the public safety discussion was taking place, as we have several times actually have seen hateful vandalism come to our church. People have come and spray painted some very, very awful, very racist things on the walls. And it's become a concern. I really understand this public safety concern in this area, especially because it's becoming a concern among many members of our community. And something that I have always found to be maybe lacking a little bit is community spaces that are more accessible during the summer. I know that we can come and gather, everybody from wherever, have a birthday party in a park, but when it's like, I'm pretty sure the last 2 weeks solid have been every single day, it's been over 100. It's really hard to go spend time at a park with your family. So that is, when we are looking into revitalizing our city and beautifying our city, I think that is something that really does need to be taken into consideration, that we do live in a ridiculously hot area of the country. I'm glad to see that the city is putting a lot of work in to beautify our city and to improve conditions here with initiatives like this, and realize we see a lot of great opportunity. I just wanted to make sure that the council is always keeping the ridiculous heat that I know it's impossible to ignore in mind when looking at these projects. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, any other folks? Okay, anyone else on the council? All right, I think do I need to say anything specific about that concluding our? Okay, great, thanks, Christine. That is it on our agenda for today. I really want to thank both of these items today were took a lot of work, so thank you all so much. Can I get a motion to? Second, Graham. Thank you.
This is on the motion to adjourn the work session. Councillor McClure is absent. Councillor Matisse?
Yes.
Councillor Graham?
Yes.
Councillor Cran is absent. Councillor Flores?
Do I have to make up my 10 minutes before I leave?
No, I will
Okay.
excuse you
Yes.
this time. And Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
And Mayor's absent.
Mm-hmm.